Oh, thank
Uh,
you.
Okay, I thought we had a slightly lighter crowd last week, and we kind of, those that were here, we went through a slog. Those last 4 or 5 chapters were really difficult to just get through all the details of ordination rites, and how to decorate an ark and lampstand and all of the rest. And then we got to 32 where there was some real interesting developments. So I thought we only read a little bit of it. I thought we'd go back, and I'm going to switch translations and read from chapter 32 from the NRSV just to catch us up to speed. So we're at the start of chapter 32, and I'm going to go, well, let's see how far we go, and I'll take a pause. Golden calf. People saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain. The people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make gods for us, who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. The gold from them, formed it in a mold, and cast an image of a calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord." They rose early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel. The Lord said to Moses, "Go down at once. Your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have acted perversely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I commanded them. They have cast for themselves an image of a calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.' The Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen this people, how stiff-necked they are. Now let me alone so that my wrath may burn hot against them and I may consume them. And of you I will make a great nation.' But Moses implored the Lord his God and said, 'O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce wrath, change your mind, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, how you swore to them by your own self, saying to them, 'I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever.' And the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring to his people, or bring on his people. And I think that's where we stopped last time. So for those that were here last week, the homework was to ponder in your heart what it means for God to be angry, hot with anger. I think, David, as you've mentioned before, the Hebrew text for that, which I have in front of me, if I'm not mistaken, talks about the nose being on fire. That's kind of how they describe when you're really angry. They're basically talking about how flustered and flushed your face gets, but the term they used was basically your nose is hot with anger. So that's why you have this. It's a little strangely worded in English. Why does your wrath burn hot against your people? So God is upset and angry, and then Moses says, "Please don't do this," and then starts to remind God of all the wonderful things he swore to Abraham and Abraham's offspring, and then the Lord changed his mind. So given that, what do you think? What are your reactions? And if you're struggling to make a reaction, what story I might have said it last week, but if not, what story in Genesis does this remind you of? Just this section we read, if anything. Does it evoke anything of this bargaining with God? I sound like a real teacher now. Anyone? Sodom and Gomorrah, the towns on the villages that God was about to destroy for not necessarily for their excessive hedonism, but more of their disobedience and their kind of that kind of thing. But God is also hot with anger, tries to destroy those two towns. And Abraham goes, actually before that, God says what he's going to do. And Abraham talks him down. Remember, he kind of bargains like a car dealership and says, what about if you just kill 50 people? Okay, I'll just kill 50. What about 10 people? Okay, just 10. You know, this, if you didn't get, again, a common theme in our Bible studies, you know, if you were taking it literally, God help you, because it was not meant that way at all. These are legends of the stories of how these towns came to be and the named what they are. And these are stories of their understanding of God, which is that sometimes it feels like they're in peril and at God's mercy, and other times it seems like God changed his mind. And, you know, we just prayed about some victims of the tornado the other day, and I can't help in the vocation I live in to sit at my home and be so grateful that it's 20 miles north of me, but then immediately going, oh God, these people, you know, how do you, we're lucky we had warning, but what if you don't have any warning and you're in Woodbridge and it's just coming right over you, you know? So the same feeling of just, why am I spared and not them is often happens. It easily could have been, I mean, 15, 20 miles is nothing, especially for a tornado moving that quick. So it's a lot to chew on, but I'm trying to rescue Yahweh a little bit here and say, this is a story about their perception of how God works, I think. What do you all think? You don't have to agree. David raised a hand. Yes, David.
I read a book that was interesting a while ago that was titled Saying No to God. And he talks about some of these issues, and he raises the possibility I thought was interesting that perhaps God was testing Moses, testing Abraham, that he had presented himself in a certain way, and God's representation of what he was talking about doing was a test to them to show that they believed that God was not this way, and that their response to God, their calling God out, was their showing that they understand that God was not this way, not a judgmental, wrathful deity, but he'd expressed his love and his compassion in a way, and their response to him was enabled God to, you know, verify that.
I totally agree. I absolutely agree. I often think when you get a story like Sodom and Gomorrah, and then you get this one here, this section where you're kind of working with God or bargaining or trying to compromise, it says as much about the people as it does necessarily about God as well, about just what we're learning, what we're understanding, and what new things we're appreciating. It also says a bit about the kind, gets to my sermon on Sunday, but about the kind of people God chooses for these ministerial roles like Moses. And if God didn't want to have a fight with Moses or an argument about this, he wouldn't have picked him to begin with. And that is also always a good metaphor for how you individually approach scripture, that it's maybe not an argument, but definitely a challenge sometimes, and definitely some things you wish you had not read. And then there's other things that are just, blessing upon blessing that you do encounter in scripture. And then that's the relationship God looks for, not just a subservient one, I think. Others, what else do you
I saw
think?
this as just being very hopeful. It was like, oh my goodness, this is great. Here's God, this all-powerful, almighty.
Right.
And that he can change his mind. And so for me, that was like, yeah. So when I screw up, I make mistakes. It's like, okay, God, I'm trying again, that he's still there. He's still loving me. And there's hope. There's hope for someone who is sinners and people that fall short of what he wants us to be. So I was really excited about that. I was like, okay, yeah. He can change his mind in it. And so, yeah, hopeful would be the word I would use.
Yeah.
I had said before, when there were all of these instructions on how to create, the ark and all that, and geez, God didn't show any humility.
Yeah.
But here he does. I mean, so
Right. Right, and they're both there back to back.
Right, so.
So which one's right? Who knows? Somewhere in
I
the
want this one to
discussion.
be right.
Yeah, exactly. Somewhere in the discussion is the answer, and this reminds me of my professor's note. Did I print it out?
I
Oh,
don't
go ahead, Mary.
know if it was God that wanted all of that on the ark.
Right, yeah.
Right,
You know, I
Right.
think it was the people thinking, okay, he's up there, he's God,
Mhm.
so he should have the most.
The best of everything.
Yeah, so,
No, yeah, but that's how I took it to me.
Right.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Calm down a little.
But
yeah,
I-
subtlety, please.
was kind of like skimming forward, but what I kind of find interesting is Moses is pleading for the people and then he comes down and he's really pissed that they're doing all this stuff and he's now mad at them and
Right.
says,
You guys,
yeah.
ruining
look
a
what I
good
just
thing.
did, what's
Ixnay
wrong
on the
with
golden
you?"
calf. It's
Good
true.
one.
Now, I meant to look this up and somebody may know off the top of their head, but I meant to look up that there might be a flaw in the text, which is that, if I'm not mistaken, for 12 chapters or so, Moses has been up on the mountain with God. And there's no way to get the message of the 10 Commandments and all those laws that we went through down to the people. So in the people's defense, they didn't know that this was a commandment not to do this yet.
and there-
I think that's a flaw in the
Aaron-
text.
And Aaron was
Aaron wouldn't know.
appointed by Moses.
Right.
so-
So
And he went right along with it.
in theory, God should calm down with the hot nose thing, because they didn't even have a chance to even receive the new guidelines. It's kind of like saying, you're at over capacity in here, and we're like, we didn't know what the capacity was. Okay. Verse 15, would someone like to read from their translation? Anyone? Maybe 15 to, oh gosh, this is gonna be exciting. I guess we'll do 15 to 35.
I have the Women's Bible or the Message. I could do either.
All
one.
right, do the Women's Bible. That's the
Okay.
Common English Bible
Yeah.
translation.
Okay.
Great.
Moses then turned around and came down the mountain. He carried the 2 covenant tablets in his hands. The tablets were written on both sides, front and back. The tablets were God's own work. What was written there was God's own writing inscribed on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, "It sounds like war in the camp." But Moses said, "It isn't the sound of a victory song. It isn't the sound of a song of defeat. The sound of party songs is what I hear." When he got near the camp and saw the bull, calf, and the dancing, Moses was furious. He hurled the tablets down and shattered them in pieces at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it in the fire. Then he ground it down to crushed powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. Moses said to Aaron, "What did these people do to you that you led them to commit such a terrible sin?" Aaron replied, "Don't get angry with me, sir. You know yourself that these people are out of control. They said to me, 'Make us gods who can lead us.' As for this man, Moses, who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't have a clue what has happened to him. So I said to them, 'Whoever has gold, take it off.' So they gave it to me. I threw it in the fire, and out came this bull calf." Moses saw the people were out of control because Aaron had let them get out of control, making them an easy target for their enemies. So Moses stood at the camp's gate and said, "Whoever is on the Lord's side, come to me." And all the Levites gathered around him. Moses said to them, "This is what the Lord, Israel's God, says. Each of you strap on your sword, go back and forth from one end of the camp to the other. Each of you kill your brother, your friend, and your neighbor." The Levites did as Moses commanded. About 3,000 people were killed that day. Moses said, "Today you've been ordained to the Lord, each one of you at the cost of a son or a brother. Today you've gained a special blessing for yourselves." The next day, Moses said to the people, "You've committed a terrible sin, so now I will go up to the Lord. Maybe I can arrange a reconciliation on account of your sin." So Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Oh, what a terrible sin these people have committed. They made for themselves gods of gold. But now please forgive their sin. And if not, then wipe me out of your scroll that you have written." But the Lord said to Moses, The ones I'll wipe out of my scroll are those who sinned against me. Now go and lead the people to the place I described to you. My messenger here will go in front of you. When the day of the reckoning comes, I'll count their sins against them. Then the Lord sent a plague on the people because of what they did with the bull calf that Aaron made.
Yeah, so, God changed his mind, but there's still ramifications, still punishment. Yeah, and it's hard again to discern what is God's direct word and what is, what is the people kind of trying to retrofit in some of why they respond violently is their kind of first reaction, right? Yes, David, go right ahead.
I was just going to say, we were talking about the descriptiveness and the elaborateness of the tent of meeting and things like that. And I think there's a lot of self-justification going on here. I think they look at other gods and they say, well, we want a temple that's just as ornate. And in this situation, they decided to take these violent actions. And so there's a lot of self-justification going on by the people who wrote the Bible. And I'm not sure that this is always truly representative of the will of God as much as what they did. But that's just my perception on this.
A lot of, even if it's not justification, they're trying to just explain why their current existence is everybody responds violently, that's the default. And you realize how far we've fallen from Eden at this point, to use the biblical term. But what's one of the first things that happens after the Garden of Eden is Cain kills Abel. So it's just it's the eternal question that I think the Hebrews, we're watching them before our very eyes here process, it's like we've time traveled 3,000 years or whatever. And while we're watching the Hebrews process why humans resort to violence, as the first thing. And we're still trying to figure out that question. What else do folks think?
Well, one of the 10 commandments was thou shalt not kill.
Yeah,
this is-
exactly.
I feel like this is messed up.
It's messed up. Yeah, say more.
Yeah,
In more
really.
ways than one.
Yeah,
That's a good
this
sermon
is
right
why I want to
there.
just go, okay, let's go, where's the New Testament?
Yeah.
Can we just start there? Because most of the Old Testament is just,
It's a battle.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's just too much contradicts what we believe, and
Right.
then we have to dig and we have to rationalize, we have to figure out what, why did they write this? And I'm just, the Old Testament makes it really hard work to
Yes,
understand what's going on, and
I agree. It's hard work. It's necessary work. I think that because it's easy, one of the reasons we're in this conundrum, all of us right now, is that we were all raised with just the 10 commandments and just full stop, right? And then now it's just clear that chapter 20 about the 10 commandments was followed by chapters 21 and 22, which said, well, killing's okay for this reason and that reason, this reason. So it turns out according to this story, according to the book of Exodus, there is one commandment that takes precedent, and it should be murder, you would think, but it's actually don't worship another God.
But-
That's the one that makes God the
Actually,
angriest.
throughout the whole Old Testament, everybody's killing everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at this, when they go into the new land, what do? They annihilate the people that's there.
Right, right. Which just can raise, exactly for those of us who are Christian, these dilemmas. In Christian ethics, it's called just war, where you just kind of go searching from the scripture and the tradition for a justification for why you have to, do war.
Mhm.
And whether you're a civilization that is oriented to defense, or whether you're a civilization that's oriented towards, making other civilizations submit to the way you do things, which is, I've preached about it before, but that's kind of the warning that John F. Kennedy gave us in many ways, himself a Roman Catholic, used to being told to think and to believe, said, we got to be careful that we're not Pax Americana, which is a play on Pax Romana. So anyway, it's food for thought, that is for sure. But yes, to quote Anne, it's messed up.
It's still going on today, though,
It is.
I
It
mean,
is.
particularly in the Middle East.
Yes.
And now, this is coming from my history husband. He said a lot, other than the fact that there's always been conflict there, but when they reorganized
Yeah.
territories,
In the
they
40s.
put people together that should not necessarily have been put together because of their cultural differences.
Right. Volatility.
Well, the people that drew these new country guidelines never paid any attention to cultures.
Right.
And so it's perpetual.
Mhm.
How's it ever gonna change?
I wish I had an answer. Some days I'm optimistic, other days I'm realistic. It's hard. I mean, I guess for us, you know, we can't solve the world's problems, but we can say that there is optimism. We just seem to have lost it in this chapter, but we had some optimism when we realized that God could evolve just as we could. God could change God's mind, just like we could.
Well, if you look at John Crossan, his explanation is that God sets a standard. It explains how he is, and then man begins to take that standard and compromise. And it's a period, it's a cycle that goes throughout the Bible, that God sets these high standards. And then the people who are in charge for their own advantage, they begin to subvert these standards, and it goes on and on. And the ultimate example of that, of God setting the standard, comes to fruition in Jesus, when he shows what he's really like through the life and the ministry and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. But even after Jesus, as soon as Jesus left, there still were people that came in and began to set up hierarchy and kind of compromise the message. So that's one way that's been a little bit helpful for me of looking at it, as there are two things going on in the Bible. There's what the standard that God sets, and then there's what man does in response to that, to kind of compromise and subvert, you know. So anyway, so
Those of us that read the book Saving Jesus from the Church, that certainly resonates in that way too, the pacifist, non-institutionalist Jesus ended up spawning just that very same thing. You know, it's kind of created a new Israel in many ways, new ancient Israel. So it's hard.
The one thing that struck me here was just how strong a character, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but that Moses has become. I mean, from early on, when I really kind of saw him as, dear God, don't make this, I can't do this, I don't have the strength, the skills, or whatever, to now coming down and confronting these people. I mean, the growth of his
Good point. Yeah.
It amazes me that this man, who just a few chapters ago was saying, no, to now taking on everybody. So
That's an excellent point. He's really grown into the role. It's really amazing. Yeah. Okay. Good to note too, that with all this punishment going around, Aaron was never punished. So, you know, everyone's always passing the buck. Okay. Chapter 33. Let's see here. All right, I'm going to switch to a different translation. This is from Robert Alter. And the Lord said to Moses, go, head up from here, and you and the people that brought you up from the land of Egypt to the land that I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, to your seed I will give it. And I shall send a messenger before you, and I shall drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, the Hittite, and the Perizzite, the Hivite and the Jebusite, to a land flowing with milk and honey. You've probably heard that phrase before. But I shall not go up in your midst, for you are a stiff-necked people. It seems like God's new favorite phrase. Lest I put an end to you on the way. Jeez. And the people heard this evil thing, and they mourned, and none of them put on their jewelry. And the Lord said to Moses, say to your Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If but a single moment I were to go up in your midst, I would put an end to you. And now put down your jewelry from upon you, and I shall know what I should do with you. And the Israelites stripped themselves of their jewelry from Mount Horeb onward. Quick interjection, not to make fun of the scripture, but don't worry, keep wearing your jewelry in church. That's not the takeaway here. It was a specific specific thing. Okay. And Moses would,
Everybody's gonna.
yeah, everyone's going like, oh no. And Moses would take the tent and pitch it for himself outside the camp, far from the camp, and he called it a tent of meeting. And so whoever sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. And so when Moses would go out to the tent, all the people would rise and each man would station himself at the entrance of his tent. And they would look after Moses until he came to the tent. And so when Moses would come to the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stand at the entrance of the tent and speak with Moses. And all the people would see the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent. And all the people would rise and bow down, each man at the entrance of his tent. And the Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his fellow. And he would return to the camp. And his attendant Joshua, son of Nun, a lad, would not budge from within the tent. I just want to stop on that line. And the Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his fellow. Well, it's not like a man speaks to his fellow, because he's speaking to a pillar in the cloud. So just want to make sure
Yeah,
we're
he's
still
not-
clear.
Doesn't see
It
his
speaks
face.
like a man would speak to a, funnel, basically, funnel cloud. And Moses said to the Lord, see, you say to me, bring up this people. Yet you have not made known to me whom you will send with me. And you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my eyes. End quote. And now if I pray, I have found favor in your eyes, let me know, pray your ways, that I may know you, so that I may find favor in your eyes. And see, for this nation is your people. And he said, my presence shall go, and I will grant you rest. And he said to him, if your presence does not go, do not take us up from here. And how then will it be known that I have found favor in your eyes, I and your people? Will it not be by your going with us that I and your people may be distinguished from every people that is on the face of the earth? And the Lord said to Moses, this thing too, which you have spoken, I will do, for you have found favor in my eyes, and I have known you by name. And he said, show me, pray, your glory. And he said, God said, I shall make all my goodness pass in front of you, and I shall invoke the name of the Lord before you, speaking of himself in the third person. And I shall grant grace to whom I grant grace, and have compassion for whom I have compassion. And God said, you shall not be able to see my face, for no human can see me and live. And the Lord said, look, there is a place with me, and you shall take your stance on the crag. So he's apparently referring to a little mountain or kind of side of a mountain nearby. And so when my glory passes over, I shall put you in the cleft of the crag and shield you with my palm until I have passed over. And I shall take away my palm, and you will see my back, but my face will not be seen. That's the end of the chapter. Okay, I kind of waltzed right into it, but this is actually one of my absolute favorite passages in the whole Bible.
Which
From
one?
verse 17 down to 23. It's preceded by Moses saying a little bit exasperated, you got to give me more here. We just had a really stressful experience about this golden calf thing. I'm doing all the work. I just lambasted the Israelites and Aaron for all the work they did. Can you give me a little bit more here? How about you tell me your name? How about you show me who you are? And no more riddles, none of that. And God engages Moses there's a lot to say here. Let me start with God engages Moses in the discussion and says, I hear what you're saying, and I actually really appreciate that. It's basically what God's saying. That's the first thing. And then they get into the nuts and bolts of how can they do this? And I'm curious to see what you all think. Show me your glory. In seminary, we called this section the holy mooning, because if you can think of it, it's very detailed, but basically what God is saying is going to do is he's going to put Moses in a little crevice or crag between two rocks so that he can't see, his periphery is blocked a little bit. And because what God's going to show him, so apparently God's going to come out of the pillar of cloud, and there's going to be, who knows what, think about Indiana Jones. It's going to be bright light, electricity, lightning, who knows what, and whatever it is, it's going to be harmful to human. So that, just flag that for a second. And then God's gonna move by him, but he's not gonna move by him front to front. He's gonna God's gonna hold a hand over Moses's eyes and then walk by him back with his back facing Moses, if that makes any sense. It's a little bit of like the game of
I
Twister.
was gonna say, it's like a game.
Yeah. But what it's doing here, what the Hebrews are doing in describing this is this kind of long tradition already in place, but really kind of cemented here of the limits to what we can actually know about God. And it's playing out here in physicality. I want to see what God is. Well, you can't see. It's almost like the questions you ask about existence or whatnot are too big for us to understand until we see God face to face, right? Or until we see the backside of God as God passes by while we're in a crevice of a rock. It's a really unusual and peculiar and yet really kind of beautiful little passage here. And I always, I don't know why, tell me if I'm not the only one, that I feel a little sad for God in this story, that there's something a little lonely about God, that God can only, can't have a direct one-on-one relationship with humans, at least at this point in the story. We know where the story is headed in the New Testament. What do you think? Anybody heard this story before?
I don't remember it,
Don't remember.
but I find it really interesting. You said it was one of your favorite.
One of my favorites, the holy mooning. It's one of my favorites just because of there's just this strange, almost supernatural expression of a really deep theological yearning for us to know God and see God, and there's something that's going to limit us,
Mhm.
and it could be just our fragility as humans. It could be that God's too powerful, I don't know, and I don't know if I'm explaining properly why I feel sad for God, but I
No,
do.
No,
Yeah,
I understand.
Well, if,
kind of like Frankenstein a little bit. in many
well,
ways,
I mean, yeah, I'm kind of confused by that. If he's all powerful,
Yeah,
I mean, he's choosing not to be seen.
yeah, exactly.
But he also said anyone who sees me can't live.
Die, yeah.
Can't live, right?
So he doesn't want that. to
Like
happen to
Medusa or
Moses.
something.
So that's why well, I guess now when you talk about it a little bit more, I can kind of see. But that's something he could change unless there's another power
In
for him.
theory, you're right, but you raise a good point. If God could change it, why won't God change it? So then this is like the eternal question of why do tornadoes hit the suburbs of Chicago, for example?
Mhm.
And why is anything horrible happening in the world that God can't change it? And you go, if God can change it and chooses not to, that makes God a little malevolent,
Mhm.
or ignorant, and if God can't change it, then maybe God's not as all powerful as we think God is, and we have to address it. So
Isn't there another, though, that God appears and I wish I could remember, they're on the mountain and there's two people with them and.
oh, you're thinking of the transfiguration.
Yes, and that's.
Remember Jesus,
Okay.
God appears and says, this is
And
my
they can't-
beloved.
They can't look at,
They can look, but it's a very bright light white. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not mistaken, this passage is often paired with that when that comes around the last Sunday of Epiphany. Yeah,
okay.
good. You got it. It's right there. It's just
Somebody
Jesus in the New
important was on a
Testament.
mountain somewhere.
Yeah.
Somebody-
No, it's
enough.
right. Jesus is on the mountain and then he starts shining bright light. So, somebody who's Jewish then would have heard and go, okay, that sounds a little familiar.
Mhm.
Sounds a little bit like Exodus. And then he sees the disciples see Moses and Elijah. So Moses now we know intimately. Elijah is a prophet, comes later in the Bible. But they're connected in many ways about just, this is not, I would pair this also, it's like I'm talking about wine and
Yeah.
meals. I would pair this passage with the one we heard on Sunday that I did not preach on from Mark's gospel, the calming of the storm, where the disciples, the last line of the gospel is, who is this man that can calm storms, this goes with lots of stuff, especially lots of supernatural stuff.
Well, and also in the New Testament, you have, after Christ is risen, Thomas
Right.
has to see to
Yes,
believe.
Yeah.
And even today, people
great point.
pray for a positive outcome. And some people get angry because they don't get the positive
That's
outcome
right.
that they wanted.
Yeah,
And it's kind of like God is this thing that we believe in, but we can never see.
right. Exactly.
And it's like, well, it's that walk by faith.
Yeah,
It's
right.
just, you have the faith that he's there. And if something bad happens, like the tornadoes, or somebody doesn't recover from an illness, we don't know the reason behind it, but God must have a reason.
Exactly.
That's the faith that we have,
Mhm.
is there
right.
will something good come out of it? Look at the tornadoes, look at the people that showed up that don't even know those people
Right.
to help clean up. So maybe the bringing
Maybe
of
that's
those
God.
communities together, and maybe there was some divisions in those communities that we don't know about. But this total disaster, which is horrible,
Yeah,
is bringing these people together.
exactly right. That preaches. It
And
sure does.
it's kind of like the silver lining in the cloud, I guess.
Yeah, and you're so right, Mary, because it also gets at the heart of, in many ways, it's a metaphor for how we encounter the scripture. That, we're only going to get a partial view, a sliver
Mhm.
of a glimpse of what God is like, but so much of how God works, how the cosmos operates, whatever you want to say about it, is ultimately knowable. And keep in mind, this is say, and this was instilled in me in seminary as well in theology, but the Enlightenment is only 300 or 400 years old, and the Enlightenment being the age kind of pre-Thomas Jefferson, but right around that same time, where everything was about how great science is and how the answer. I'm not saying science is not great. Don't go there. But how science is king, and that faith had it all wrong, and that none of this is, because science doesn't prove any of this, therefore all of this is negated. So we are now in that post-Enlightenment world where we need proof. We feel like science should have an answer to something, and if science doesn't have an answer, then there's problem in the system, or our science needs to evolve more. When in reality, we've come back full circle in many ways to this, to remind us that we can know as much as we want to know, and we're only going to get a glimpse of just a fraction of what God is really like. And we have to live with it in many ways. It's going to be interesting to see if Moses is going to be satisfied. Yes, Pam, go ahead.
So when Mary was just talking about the tornado and about, people gathering and helping them out, and maybe the neighboring communities, I think it even went out further than that it's a lesson for all of us if we really listen. And so when I was down in the basement the other night, and then worrying about Kate and Sam being so close to it, when I woke up in the morning and saw the devastation, I also thought, okay, Lord, so I can go and help. But what can I do personally to learn from this? And so I think there's a lesson in it. And so as I saw the houses with the sites, missing, I thought, okay, so there's got to be I've got to just stop and think, okay, what can I learn from this? How can I move forward? Does it make sense? I think it's just, it was leading the news. It was leading the like the Today Show. And so I'm hoping that more people are thinking, boy, this is a shame. We need to help them, but what are we supposed to learn from this?
Yeah.
It's our message.
Their message, right? Might it have something to do with, I'll go there, extreme weather and what our impact is on the climate? Is
Yeah.
that a facet? I've certainly, when I walk outside and it's 65 degrees at the end of June, I'm like, boy, something's not wrong. This planet is cooking in the wrong way because it's not supposed to be this cold,
But that's where you bring the science in with all of
Exactly.
this.
Right.
And science is proving some of
Right.
these things, because look what was learned from the earthquakes in California.
Yes,
They now build differently.
right,
Yes, yes.
It doesn't totally prevent some damage, but it certainly limits the
Right.
damage. And that's where the science comes in. And you may say, well, God sent this earthquake. Well, it's the way
Yeah.
he formed the universe.
Yeah,
If we go
unfortunately.
back to creation, I mean, he created this.
right,
And so if he put these splits in there that's going to erupt,
yeah,
then science now has learned more how to deal with it. So it kind of brings scripture and science together.
right, exactly. It's true, and that's, I think, where when I say we're going full circle, it's not really quite. We're now at a place where science and faith need to be conversation partners, not
Right, not
yeah.
separate entities.
separate entities fighting each other. Exactly right.
It's kind of like we have the separation of church and state. Do we really?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
what do you see when you walk into the Capitol building? What's there?
right, right.
What's on our money?
Exactly. What's on our money? Exactly. In God we trust. I mean, there's so much in here, in just a short little passage. And I don't want to gloss over that we're now starting to talk about something which I don't think in any of the translations I have, at least, the phrase promised land has not come up yet, but that's coming. And so remember, the Israelites are on a journey. They're moving from slavery to the promised land, which is, going to be present day Israel. But on their route is where all of this drama is unfolding. And now it's being referred to wherever they're going as a land flowing with milk and honey. And God says, my presence, one of the things Moses is trying to get with God is, are you going to leave us? Again, what a heartbreaking question. Are you going to be with us when you go? And God is promising, I will be with you. That's huge. Again, way different than just the previous chapter where we're killing everybody, right? Where our nose is on fire with anger. And the two words that's being used here, and that's interesting, is we've got God talking about his presence going with Israel to the promised land. I know they're not saying promised land. And then we're talking about, can I see your face? The word for presence and face is the same word in Hebrew, panim. Panim. So the Hebrew, they know what they're doing in this text. The problem is we don't know what they're doing sometimes, but it's right there in, plain Hebrew and now in English that this is poetry in many ways of saying, just as God is saying, my presence will be with you. There's the same tussle between Moses saying, can I see your face? Do you see that connection? It's really powerful. We are not likely to recover, this is from one of my notes, what the key term kavod, Hebrew for glory, honor, divine presence, or very literally weightiness, conveyed on the Hebrew imagination in ancient times. In any case, Moses, who first, this gets what you were saying, Barb, first fearfully encountered God in the fire and the burning bush, is now ready and eager to be granted a full-scale epiphany. This is the origin of the word epiphany, a frontal revelation of the look and character of this divinity that has been speaking to him from within a pillar of cloud. So epiphany means how God reveals God's self to us, which is what the season is about. And for Christians, we're talking about how God reveals himself through Jesus. But here, we don't have Jesus yet. We're a few thousand years in advance. We want a literal show yourself, reveal yourself, revelation. And this is God's kind of doing what God's capable of doing, which gets back to Jan's question of what does that mean about God if God's only capable of doing this? Can't God change that?
Well, could some of their wanting to see him is because, they did the golden calf. And they had these other gods. They can see that. It's a physical thing. They can see, they can touch, they can worship.
Right.
And now they're being asked to worship this entity that they can't even see.
Yeah.
And so that's a big issue for people
Exactly.
that's always had something visual. And I think we even have it in our churches today. How many things do we have that's visual?
Right.
That's supposed to enhance our faith and our belief.
That's right. Okay, one more note here. Volumes of theology have been spun out of these enigmatic words, you will see my back, but my face will not be seen. Imagine a deity in frankly physical terms was entirely natural for the ancient monotheists. I thought I was going to see the word naked. This God had, or at least could assume, a concrete manifestation which had a front and a rear, face and back, and that face man was forbidden to see. But such concreteness does not imply conceptual naivete. Through it, the Hebrew writer suggests an idea that makes good sense from later theological perspectives, that God's intrinsic nature is inaccessible and perhaps also intolerable to the finite mind of man. So this writer says it in a much more beautiful way of what I'm trying to say, that, and we can't handle sometimes all of the things God has to deal with. By the way, you would have heard that Sunday in the Job lesson that we did not read. We had an option to do Job, which we did 3 years ago and I preached on it, or the Samuel story. The Job story was God saying, where were you when I formed creation? Because Job is complaining, right? Rightly so. Job has every reason to complain. And God is going like, basically, you have no idea what kind of job I do. And you would do well to remember that, and that's just a powerful. Anybody at home, Leslie, or anybody want to add anything before we move on?
No, but David had something earlier, but I don't know if he changed his mind.
David, hit us. What do you got? Oh,
I said what I had to say. Yeah.
okay, good. Am who I am. Is that what you're saying?
No, I just think that a lot of this might have to do with the fact that the people here are trying to say that God is so holy, so other, so unapproachable that he can't be observed and live. I think that it's just a matter of that the God is so other, so different. He's not like some of the other gods around that kind of palled around with people, but he's just so other that you can't even observe him and live. So that was about it. Yeah.
You're right. Verse 19, and then we'll move on, has this wonderful phrase where God is speaking about God's self in third person. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before your name, the Lord Yahweh, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. And God says God's name, really kind of a meta moment. God says, I will go before you and I will say, I, God. But remember, God doesn't have a name. So God basically says, I, Yahweh, which means, remember, I am who I am. And then I am. So God will basically, this is literally what God was saying in Hebrew. I will make all my goodness pass before you. I proclaim before you the name, I am who I am. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. And you see why with those, when you put those two phrases back to back, how the name Yahweh is so special, because they mean the same thing. I am who I am. I show grace on who I show grace. That's the whole meaning of grace. It's frustrating in a post-enlightenment world where we are merit-based and capitalists, and we think you earn what you get. And God is saying, in God's very name, I am gracious to whom I show gracious. And if you don't understand it, tough, you know what. But that's the way, that's the existence you're in. And everything else you do on merit is about you and not about God. And that's a hard thing for Christians to understand sometimes. Okay, chapter 34. Let's go back to cut some stones. Would anyone like to read 34? Maybe. Great, 1 to 10, and see if you want to pause there, Leslie. Thanks.
Okay, and I'm reading from the NRSV.
Okay, great.
The Lord said to Moses, cut 2 tablets of stone like the former ones, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the former tablets, which you broke. Be ready in the morning and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai and present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. No one shall come up with you, and do not let anyone be seen throughout all the mountain. And do not let flocks or herds graze in front of the mountain. So Moses cut 2 tablets of stone like the former ones, and he rose early in the morning and came up on Mount Sinai, as the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hand the 2 tablets of stone. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed this name, the Lord. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for the 1000th generation, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, yet by no means clearing the guilty, but visiting the iniquity of the parents upon the children and the children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation. And Moses quickly bowed his head toward the earth and worshiped. He said, "If now I have found favor in your sight, O Lord, I pray, let the Lord go with us. Although this is a stiff-necked people, pardon our iniquity and our sin and take us for your inheritance." And he said, "I hereby make a covenant before all your people. I will perform marvels such as have not been performed in all the earth or in any nation. And all the people among whom you live shall see the work of the Lord. For it is an awesome thing that I will do with you." And that's the end. You said to 10.
Yep. So it may seem a little awkward to you, but remember, we've just come out of an experience where God basically says, you can only know so much about me and live. God sings a song about God's self. Mine is off, verse 6 and 7 are offset like like poetry almost. So clearly you should know at this point that I think it's a pretty good indicator in all of scripture, if I can be so bold. I can't think of an example where it's not the case. When you see something written offset like this, like poetry, it pre-existed the material. And that many ways the story is written around that song or that poem to help explain how that song or that poem came into being. So there was some kind of song that you can probably rightfully assume that the Hebrews would sing or, stencil or stitch, cross stitch, who knows, that went, Yahweh, Yahweh, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. It sounds like a motto or a creed or almost. But what we're doing is exactly what they say in verse 10. I'm making a covenant. The tablets of stone were destroyed when Moses saw the golden calf, and now we got to do it again. And it's actually supposed to be quite comforting. God could have said, had many opportunities, had it within, I don't want to say his right, but had it within his capacity to just flood the earth and start all over again. Or move on to Jupiter and see if there's any human life there. Who knows? But instead said, why don't we let's do this, Moses. Why don't we build the covenant back up, starting with the stone tablets. Let's go back to square one. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful way to kind of understand what's happening here. What do you all think?
My question is how did he get all that information about building the temple or the tabernacle and the 10 commandments and all the other law, the last 4 chapters on 2 stone tablets? I know we always see Charlton Heston with the 2 stone tablets with just the 10 commandments on it, but there's a lot more than the 10 commandments that Moses had to remember when they were trying to set up the tabernacle. So where did all that stuff go? I mean, he can't just sit there and remember unless he has a didactic type of memory.
Amazing that in all the translations, all of the scribes that wrote and rewrote all this, that nobody flagged that. Kind of like nobody said, hey, wait a minute, didn't Aaron and them, they didn't know what the commandments were before they built the golden calf? Same way here, you think someone could have just inserted a line and said, and then God also provided the appendix manual with all the other laws or something. Or it's like in Willy Wonka where he's got the really tiny type all on their little covenant that they signed. Who knows? It's just a flaw in the text. And I don't think they're trying to say that all of those other laws that we went through in the description of the covenant and everything, that all of that stuff is negated now and that only the 10 commandments matter. I think it's implied that the rest of that stuff goes down with it. But it's hard because it's not there.
They didn't,
Well, I was just gonna say, go ahead, please.
We're just saying they didn't have pen and paper, so yeah. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, these come from different sources. They were combined by an editor. They weren't always combined chronologically. They put them in different orders. And so those specific instructions, they come from a priestly source. And then these instructions here that Leslie just read in verse 34, they come from a Yavist and an E source with the last part of this chapter. So a lot of these things are not given to them chronologically. They're put back together to make a kind of story. But a lot of these different sources come from completely different time periods.
Exactly. And it's hard because, they're just assembling over generations. Nobody's going through, there's no editor at Random House sitting here going, Random House Canaan, sitting here going, something's done right here, guys.
Yeah, we have a continuity error here, yeah.
They just go, well, they said this, put it all in. And I think that's actually the God's honest truth about how the Bible works. So it is what it is. It also explained, earlier when we started, we were talking about the golden calf, there was a lot of repetition. The narrator describes what's going on and then somebody exclaims everything the narrator just said. And that's partly because of the same thing, but also because the poetry of the Hebrew, remember, this is an auditory thing. Nobody had, you had a scroll if you were lucky at this point. Actually, the reason for this is you didn't have a scroll. You wanted to have stuff that repetitive so that people could hear it and remember it because they didn't have anything in front. They didn't have a leaflet in front of them. So
one of the things I feel as we're reading this is if you're just reading it and not discussing it with other people or with somebody who's done some biblical study, you can just take the lines, especially like the children, will be punished.
yeah.
So that justifies when something, it did justify why when kids were born and there was something wrong, well, the parents must have done something bad or evil or whatever.
Right.
And you can pull these things out of context and use, this to hurt other people to, it's not always a source of comfort. And, I think it's so important that it's almost not read by yourself. It should be read in community and shared in community, either the worship, there when the sermon ties things together. But it's, frightening when you read some of this stuff, like Moses telling you, oh, kill everybody, kill your brother, kill your neighbor. What kind of God that we look at now would want that to be done?
Yeah. I think God would say, can you read the whole book, please?
Yeah, don't pull me out of context.
Yeah, exactly. It's you make a beautiful point. I mean, we're doing what was originally intended of the text, which was to be discussed, debated. A midrash is the term that's still in play today when they fill in the gaps between the text with their own stories, like a midrash, for example, would be, how about a story about what's going on with the Israelites and Aaron while all of the tablets are being made the first go round. A midrash should be imagining more of the story of them coming to the decision about the bull. A midrash here would be, oh gosh, where would it be? Just all these, a story about Moses asking about, what about all the other laws that you talk about? That's a midrash. You kind of go, it's not in the text, but you kind of go beyond it and you just kind of imagine some things. That's very Jewish, very Hebrew, ancient Hebrew.
So like
And
a further conversation
Yeah,
on the point.
exactly.
Yeah.
Conversation, a what if, and
Or why?
encouraging
And the
disagreement.
people, because so much of this was written for the people for a specific audience.
Right.
And I think we lose that because we're reading it as our audience.
Yeah.
What's happening and it does fit.
Right. Doesn't square. Yeah.
Well, and I think too, sometimes like this one of the children and of the parents, so many people, they take something from the Bible and use it to justify their own thoughts,
Yes,
and then put it out there as though it's literal.
right.
And, well, and we see it all the time, even in day-to-day things. How many times has somebody's quote not been complete? Few words from their quote, particularly politically.
Yeah,
And yet such a big hubbub is made of it because they took maybe 4 or 5 words out of a
Right.
3-sentence quote.
right. And they tend to say, and the Bible says,
And
Blah, blah,
then
blah,
they
blah, right.
support it with
And it's
some
like,
passage from the
your
Bible.
first question now should be, which book of the Bible was that?
Yeah.
And who wrote it? So,
Uh-huh, and when.
yeah,
And
'cause
who were
the-
they talking to?
it's pretty hard for a library to say one thing, because even in any library, there's multiple stories and books, and that's the way to think of this. It's true. Wow. All right. Unfortunately, that's it for today, everybody. We're going to pick it back up with verse 11 next week. And just so you know where we're headed, if you're wondering, there's only about 6 chapters left, and we're in the midst of one of them. So we'll probably be finishing Exodus in the next 2, maybe 3 weeks. I'm not promising anything, but I've reached out to my professor, Judy, to see if there's any hope since we're in the summer, she's not teaching, maybe she can Zoom with us and answer some questions about, maybe I'll bribe her with like, we'll each buy her book, Holy Imagination. She wouldn't do it, but we'll see, maybe an honorarium, but I'm hoping we can get her for a Bible study, and if not, it might be maybe an evening thing or something too, so
Wow.
we can ask her all the questions about Exodus you want to ask. All right, fingers crossed. Until then, take care, everybody. Bye,
All right,
everybody.
God bless. Thank you, Greg.